So today we're going to talk about one of my great loves. Now, I know many of you will not share this love, not yet. I don't expect you to. In fact, for all my love of this thing, I still have some reservations of my own about it. I even quit this thing for a number of years following a sort of a particularly unsettling spectacle, which we may get to today. This thing is violent. It's often brutal. It has a history of crookedness and graft, heartbreak, tragedy, exploitation, but it's also beautiful and inspiring, and I just can't help myself. It's something I have a huge passion for, which I probably spent 20,000 hours of my life watching, studying, analyzing, and as you'll see today, something I can talk about endlessly. It's my hope that even if you don't like this thing or don't have an opinion about it, my enthusiasm will be contagious. I can promise you this thing always tells a story, and often the stories are harrowing. My conversation partner today is somebody who knows more about this thing and has spent about as much time around it as just about anyone alive. He's somebody I greatly admire as a professional and a voice and a storyteller. And to be honest, I was astonished that he agreed to join me because he's a giant in the realm of this thing, which is the sweet science. Yes, we're going to talk about boxing today, but first, let me give you a little of Jim's CV so you realize what a big deal this guy is. Jim, as a broadcaster in his story career, followed Jim McKay as the host of Wide World of Sports. He followed Howard Cosell as the host of Monday Night Football. He's partnered with ABC, CBS, NBC, Turner, and HBO. It's been an amazing career, but where he won my heart is the 30-year face of HBO Boxing, where I've watched him call thousands of fights. So please welcome to the show, the great Jim Lampley. Jim Lampley, thanks for being our fresh face in hell this week. It's a real thrill for me. I think I probably watched 3,000 fights that you called over the years. And I don't usually get nervous around A-list celebrities, movie stars or rock stars. We have them on the show, but like only twice has this happened to me, and both times it's been broadcasters. Dave Niehaus, who called so many play-by-play games for the Seattle Mariners that he was like the voice of God coming out of my radio. So when I sat in the booth with him, I was like, whoa. And now Jim Lampley, God, we're talking 10, 15,000 hours of your blow-by-blow HBO boxing coverage. So thanks for joining us today.
My privilege. Thanks very much.
So before, eventually we're going to break down Crawford Canelo, which of course is coming up on the 13th. But I wanted to talk broadly about boxing, which, as you know, has lost some traction over the decades. But this upcoming fight, is a chance for it to regain. And what's happening with Riyadh season, it's really seeming to get a little traction and maybe a little more crossover back into mainstream culture. So I wanted to talk broadly about like what prize fighting is to America, because we talk about baseball as the great American pastime, but the reality is that prize fighting was really kind of the first great American sports spectacle.
Well, if you go back to the 1920s and 1930s, that was arguably the real heyday of boxing in American culture. There was another true glory period in the 1950s when I was a kid watching Don Dunphy call fights on Gillette Friday Night Fights every Friday night and gathering a growing understanding or appreciation for the sport. Then, of course, you have the singular era that goes with maybe the most singular athlete of all time in that sport and equal to people like Babe Ruth and Bronco Nagurski in other general sports, and that's Muhammad Ali, of course. Muhammad Ali is arguably the most famous and important boxer of the 20th century and did more to proliferate the sport around the world than anybody else. He was my childhood and teenage years hero and galvanized a lot of other people's interest in boxing, and he produced, of course, 3 unforgettable fights with Joe Frazier. That was one of the things that created the whole idea of the trilogy as a landmark in boxing, and there have been various other meaningful trilogies since then. I called some great trilogies
Oh,
on
you called
HBO,
4 of the
which
best.
only boxing fans know about or recognize. If you have real boxing fans who are with us right now, when I say Gaddy Ward or Barrera Morales, they know what I'm talking about. There are a lot of people who are general sports oriented who don't have a clue because boxing became a boutique rather than a general culture sport. But as a boutique, it was ideal for a boutique television network. And the heart of my boxing career is 30 years of calling fights on the ultimate boutique television network, HBO. And of course, HBO was perfect for boxing because what was more important than the size of the audience was the commitment and the habitual attendance of the audience. And so when we had great fights on HBO, we knew that the boxing fans would be there en masse, and we didn't have to worry about the fact that boxing was seen by so many as a minor rather than a general sport. But it's been through various stages of evolution. It continues now through another stage of evolution. Canelo versus Crawford is a fight which is either disdained and ridiculed by general sports media because Canelo is a Mexican star and Crawford is an American fighter of tremendous accomplishment without a huge public profile. But within the sport, it's a fascinating fight because Canelo is the number one dollar for dollar fighter in boxing. He's the person you want to fight if you want to make the most possible money outside the heavyweight division. And Crawford is the number one pound for pound fighter in boxing. He's the guy you want to fight if you want to prove that you can beat anybody of any skill level at whatever weight he's going to choose to fight at. It's a tremendously audacious leap for Crawford, who is basically going up 21 pounds from his longtime career weight of 147 pounds to fight Canelo at what is Canelo's home base weight of 168. So it's illogical to favor Crawford. You have to favor Canelo. But if Crawford beats him, it will be a tremendous feather in the cap of one of the best American fighters from a river city in the middle of the country since Sugar Ray Robinson, Aaron Pryor, and a variety of other fighters who occupy that description.
Man, Jim, you do well. There goes 8 of my questions right there, man. That was beautiful. Well, we're already on Canelo Crawford now, so I want to speak a little of my piece on this because people are getting on the Crawford bandwagon now. People, everyone's like, there's weight classes for a reason. But I have to say about Bud Crawford, and I go back to Ezra Charles and Joe Louis. I found everything. I mean, I go to sleep at night watching old, like, grainy video of fights from the 1930s. And Bud Crawford has something I've very, very rarely seen in a fighter, which is this ability to slow the fight down so much. It's not just about letting his hands go. It's like he's seeing the fight in slow motion, the way he picks his spots, the way he processes his sort of preternatural calm in the ring, whether he's being stocked, whether he's countering, however, he's just so versatile. And I think he suffers from what people would call a weak resume. It hasn't been the greatest era in any of those weight classes or for boxing in general, but it's how he's won those fights. These were world champions, a lot of them. I mean, he had 18, 19 consecutive title fights in a row. Most of these guys were undefeated going in. Now, maybe they weren't big names, but he defeated them so convincingly. What really excites me about this fight is that we've never seen Crawford in an actual war. I mean, Gamboa rocked him a little bit, Kavaliauskas, but he quickly made the adjustment and ended those fights convincingly. We may see Bud get in trouble for the first time ever, and that's as you know, that's kind of shows the true character of a boxer. I mean, we've seen guys come back from the dead. Larry Holmes, like how did he survive that? But we've never seen anything approaching that. Crawford's never really been in a close fight.
A lot of people expected him to have trouble against Errol Spence. I have covered Terrence Crawford
I
since
was
his
with
first
you on this.
emergence, and I was one of the relative few in the boxing culture who said, no, I don't think he's going to have any particular trouble with Errol Spence, and he didn't. And he scored
Styles.
an easy knockout for him. Um, he's a tremendously gifted fighter, and not a lot of people saw that coming. He was not a celebrated amateur. He was a sparring partner in the camp of Timothy Bradley at a moment way back in the day when Top Rank was looking for a logical opponent for a rising South American star named Bradis Prescott, who was expected to at some point win a 135-pound world championship. And on the undercard of a pay-per-view in Las Vegas, Top Rank was putting together a showcase fight for Prescott, and they were looking around for an opponent who could fight him. And Bradley, who was a top-ranked fighter, told the matchmakers, hey, you ought to put this guy who's sparring with me, Terrence Crawford, in with him. I think Terrence will beat him. And so the matchmakers listened. They put Crawford in with Bradis Prescott. I called the fight. Prescott was a logical and one-sided favorite. Crawford dominated him, easily won the fight, and remains unbeaten to this day. So he is a River City American fighter. You mentioned Desert Charles and others of their ilk, River City fighters who emerged to become big stars. Crawford, I can't remember another great fighter from Omaha, but he does have a lot of things in common with Sugar Ray Robinson. He trains fiercely the way Robinson did. And, again, it's not logical to pick him to win the fight. Canelo is a 168-pound fighter. Crawford, by career, is a 135-pound fighter who became a 147-pound fighter, won one fight at 154 pounds. But given that Canelo has arguably the sturdiest punch resistance in the sport, commonly called a chin, but in his case, it's more about his legs, you don't see Crawford knocking Canelo out. Nobody has ever put Canelo on his back. So Crawford has to probably envision himself winning a decision, and I would never rule that out. He's too good to be counted out of any fight.
So, and as you know, we know styles make fights, and this is something I can't ignore because, as you said, I was not surprised at all that Crawford dominated Spence because I'm always going to take a great counterpuncher over a kind of a straight line aggressor. And I had noticed, I'm such a nerd that I watch the training videos and stuff, and I just kind of saw Spence is sort of predictable. A lot of 1-1-2. I mean, he was an overwhelming. He was a big welterweight. He could cut off the ring good, but I wasn't surprised. I called that as a late round stoppage. I said 10th round. Crawford beat me there by a round.
You were right on target, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, and we talked about balance and we talked about Canelo's chin, and people, I'm not convinced. See, because it's the ones you don't see that get you, right? Terrence Crawford tends to catch. I've seen two habits in both. Maybe you'll appreciate this. I've seen a habit in each of them that tells me that I think Crawford can get Canelo on his front foot and possibly stun him. And this is this. One thing I've noticed that Canelo does is when he's trying to minimize distance, he moves his back foot forward in first. Okay? That means he's on his front foot for a split second. And I see that as an opportunity. And conversely, how with Bud tends to sometimes pull straight out. That's a big opportunity for Canelo. These are two style things, particularly about the fighter, that could get them in trouble. And I think even if he doesn't knock out Canelo, his face may not look good in the later rounds of that fight, because I think my only fear, obviously I'm a Bud fan, is that Canelo could just walk through his power. But I think it's the nature of the power and the angles and the shots. Crawford is so good at managing the distance. As long as he doesn't catch that one-hitter quitter, as Amir Khan did, I think he can win a decision at least. But I think he may hurt Canelo.
Well, I would never rule Terrence Crawford out of a fight when I think he's ready. And I think he has done a magnificent job of creating a new body. I don't know if you've seen the training photographs of Crawford with the new muscle build. He looks like an NFL running back. And of course, he has extremely sophisticated help with nutrition and training, et cetera, up to and including Victor Conti and the legal substances that Conti now uses to help stimulate performance. Terrence is a big believer in the hyperbaric chamber and the other methods that are involved in Conti's approach. Conti's fighters have had tremendous success over the course of the past few years. Nobody has tested positive for anything. So at the end of the day, I don't expect Terrence Crawford to test positive for anything here, regardless of Conti's influence. I think that there are lots of ways to conjure that Terrence can be a real threat to win the fight. But at the end of the day, and and you made a good point about Canelo and his footwork and his weight shift. One thing I'm sure you've noticed, because I now know your sophistication, is that when Canelo approaches and he gets ready to come forward, he moves the back foot first. He does not move the front foot first. And by moving the back foot first, he reestablishes his balance before he gets into the attacking position on the inside. That's different from what a lot of attacking fighters do. But Canelo, of course, is basically a counterpuncher, has a tendency to understand that defense comes first. He's a great defender as well as a power punching counterpuncher. Again, to me, he's the logical favorite in the fight, as much as I love and cherish the many fights I've called in Terrence Crawford's career.
Yeah, and a lot of people would use to support that argument as well is that a lot of people say Crawford struggled in the Madrimov fight. I watched that fight, and man, that was one awkward dude, man. That he was fainting constantly. He had great footwork. He presented a very hard target. I'm surprised Ortiz was able to hit him as well as he did, but I watching that fight, I feel like he went in with a slightly different game plan. He was a really tough cookie against Crawford. He was just hard to hit. I mean, Crawford got to him. I didn't think the fight was 115-13. I scored it much more toward Crawford. I thought he beat him convincingly, but I just think he's kind of an outlier. I don't think he's a good example for people saying, "Oh, Bud struggled at 154." I think that was a timing thing, and I don't think Canelo presents any more of a timing challenge than Spence did. I think that he walks in behind that high guard. He's not putting them together in bunches like he used to. He tends to get in behind that high guard and sort of load up a little more. His punch output in his last few fights has been down. I don't think that. I guess Canelo might surprise us and come in and look like Canelo from 5 years ago, pre-GGG. He might be a little lighter on his feet and maybe throwing more punches, more combinations. I think that would surprise Crawford, frankly.
Well, if ever somebody needed evidence to prove his chin, Canelo did it in 3 fights against Triple G. I don't think there was anybody else in that weight neighborhood on the planet who could have stood in against Triple G the way he did. And that was the key to coming away with a draw in the first fight and a victory in the second fight. At the end of the day, he mastered Golovkin, and I did not believe going in that he could do that. So another kudo to Canelo Alvarez for what he's done. Again, Crawford Madrimov, hard fight to score. I knew some very competent, good boxing writers, scorers who scored the fight for Madrimov. I'm not going to tell them they don't know what they're talking about. I did say I was working for ppv.com that night, delivering text chain information on the fight, and I saw in the text chain people who were saying, "Oh, Madrimov is winning this fight," and what I said in the text chain was, "This is an American fighter against an Eastern European fighter fighting in the United States before a big crowd in Los Angeles. That is a very tough decision for Madrimov to win. I don't believe it's going to happen." And as it turned out, I was right. It was something close to a 50-50 fight. I would say a 60-40 fight for Crawford. In my mind, he is still definitely unbeaten.
Yeah, and you say something very interesting about we talk about Canelo's chin, but you brought up something interesting about his the horse riding, the hunter jumper stuff. He just has a great base. That's part of the reason. Even when Cotto rocked him, I mean, he looked out on his feet mentally, but like he was like Frankenstein or something. His feet were still like firm on the ground. That wide base from the horse riding, I never heard anybody bring that up, but it's like a great explanation, I think, as well as his punch resistance of why he's so hard to get off his feet.
That's a Jim Lampleyism, and that comes from the fact that he was my neighbor in Del Mar, California for several years. He lived about a mile and a half away from me. I ran into his trainer, Chepo, at the grocery store many times, looked into the basket and said, "Oh, he's eating tuna." He said, "Yeah, he's eating tuna and chicken and stuff like that." Um, he ultimately was the one who told me that he had a standard routine of 2 hours of hunter jumper in the morning, and then 2.5 hours of boxing at the gym in the afternoon. And I was blown away by that because I had tried horseback riding at one point, and I knew how much exertion it required from your legs to be able to be competent riding hunter jumper horseback. And I said, "Canelo, how can you do that?" And he said, "Well, think about it." He said, "Everything I do on the horse is from the waist down. Everything I do in the boxing gym, almost all of it, is from the waist up. So it's really two different workouts that don't contrast with each other. And ultimately, it gives me exactly the right kind of overall approach to go into the fights with confidence." Yes, we call it a chin in boxing. In Canelo's case, I love to argue it's not his chin, it's his legs. He's never been off balance except the one time when he bounced off the ropes against Jose Cotto, and the referee very technically ruled it a knockdown, claiming that the ropes had kept him up. Other than that, I mean, if Gennady Golovkin can't knock you down, you can't be knocked down. That's my position.
We'll see. I mean, if you catch him by surprise, I think he kind of knew what to expect with Golovkin a little. Although I think Golovkin, I don't know. I kind of liked Golovkin in that first fight. I know that Canelo landed more of the power punches, but I just thought that jab really sort of dictated the fight. I thought Golovkin's jab, he just landed so many more jabs, but ultimately it was a draw. I mean, it was a great trilogies. Speaking of trilogies, and we talked about this earlier, you've called four of the great ones, the aforementioned Gotti versus Ward, Barrera, you know, Barrera,
Holyfield versus Bo.
Holyfield versus Bo, and the Golovkin tree. Now, if gun to your head, if you had to pick one of those as your favorite, I know which one I would probably pick. If you had to pick one of those trilogies as your favorite overall narrative, all three fights considered, just like as a whole narrative arc, which one of those are you picking?
Well, it's four different cultural items if you think about it. Okay, you've got an Eastern European against a Mexican in Golovkin versus Canelo. You've got Mexicans against each other, one of them from Tijuana, the other from Mexico City, in Barrera versus Morales. You've got Gatti versus Ward. Gatti, a scruffy street kid from Montreal. Ward, a scruffy street kid from Lowell, Connecticut. That was all blood and guts. And Bo versus Holyfield, the greatest heavyweight trilogy I ever saw, for sure, and some unforgettable moments on both sides. And they ultimately wound up in their post-boxing careers living with each other in an apartment in Deerfield Beach, Florida. I mean, we saw what happened with Mickey and Arturo. They became blood brothers and best friends. I was with Marco Antonio and Eric at the International Boxing Hall of Fame last summer. Inseparable. You couldn't get them away from each other. And they used to profess to hate each other's guts. But once you go through a trilogy like that, you've tasted each other's blood. You've tasted each other's sweat. You've plumbed the depths of the other person's resistance. You know what he can take and what he can't take. You know more about each other by the time the third fight is over than your mothers know about each other. You've been to the limits of each person's ability to take and to give out, and they wind up with a level of respect and, yes, love that isn't duplicated in any team sport or, to my knowledge, in any other individual sport. Maybe tennis
It's like
players
going to
get
war.
close
I
to
mean,
it.
it's like guys
Maybe
in the
tennis
trenches together.
players get close to it because their margins of competition are so fine, and tennis is boxing with rackets. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like the great trilogy in boxing, and I was privileged to call all of the various ones that I did.
Yeah. Now, tennis, you just compared tennis to boxing. In one way, it's not alike. One way, no real individual sport is like boxing is the stories. As a novelist, I mean, as much as I love the action and the technique and everything about that, one of the main things, and me and my buddy Willie Vlotten, another novelist, are always talking about is the great stories of boxing. Not just the stories that happen in the ring, which are great dramas into themselves, but there's so much of the Horatio Alger in prize fighting. There's so much of the boxers very, very rarely have an easy shot. You know what I mean? I mean, from uh, Sonny Liston to Joe Frazier to these
These are
people,
hard lives.
sex.
These are
Their
not
parents are sex
easy
workers. Or
lives.
yeah,
These are lives that test you in every way. And that's why great fighters are the remarkable individuals that they are. Because generally speaking, the truly great fighters have endured hardship in the ring and out of the ring and have mastered it both ways.
yeah. Well, resilience is kind of the key to anything. As you know, I had to write 7 novels to be good. I had to get used to taking a steel toe in the face, and the fact that I was raised by a single mom and raised hard. That resilience builds character, and like if you can personify that character in the ring, you go from goat to legend like that. But who would you say? I mean, Duran, of course, has his childhood on the streets. Who would you say is maybe one of your favorite and most inspiring stories? I think I know who you might say.
Really?
Yeah.
Who might I pick?
I was just thinking you might say Bernard Hopkins because I know you have a relationship
He's a
with Bernard.
great story.
Yeah.
He's a tremendous story, and yes, I mean that's a good call because we became very close friends, and I got him into boxing broadcasting, doing technical feature pieces on my show, The Fight Game, and of course, Bernard still has, and it's the key indicator of his personality that he still has his prison ID number tattooed on his arm. And I asked him once, why have you never had it removed? And he said, because I never want to forget. I never want to go back. I never want to do anything like that again. And he said that the day that I walked out of Graterford Prison, the warden said to me as I was leaving, "You'll be back." And I said to him, "No, I won't." And then after that, it's a great phrase. He described to me the experience of, quote, walking off 9. Walking off 9 meant existing for 9 more years in the neighborhood where he had been the king of the streets, in the neighborhood where he had committed crimes and ultimately gotten himself thrown in prison, and he had to be on probation and he had to be totally clean. That was what walking off 9 was. 9 years of probation. And he got through it. And he built a legendary Hall of Fame boxing career, almost all through craft and technique, not natural physical gifts. Yeah, he was a little bigger than De La Hoya, but at the end of the day, Bernard mostly beat people with his boxing knowledge and his boxing skill. And that's, any number of other fighters we can name. That's Ezzard Charles, that's Sugar Ray Robinson, that's a lot of different guys down through the years, and Bernard has tremendous appreciation and respect for all of them. I can't pick any one. I really can't pick any one. I was close to Oscar De La Hoya when he was coming out of childhood and getting ready to become the biggest 19-year-old star in the culture. I was an idolator of Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, and he at one point after retirement, toward the end, spent 8 or 9 hours babysitting my 8-year-old daughter at the United States Boxing Writers Association award dinner in New York. We became close. I worked with George Foreman and got past that particular sort of iron guard around his personality and ultimately penetrated enough to become friends with George. It was an amazing and wonderful, valuable experience. I could go on and on and on about my friendships with fighters. So when you ask me, oh, who would I isolate as just one? Not possible. There are too many, and they mean too much to me personally over time. Mickey, Arturo, Eric, and Marco Antonio, all of them are very, very personally meaningful to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned Foreman, who obviously we know he reinvented himself in a fighter after the layoff, coming back in his 40s to regain the championship. But he also did something else during that layoff, which was to reinvent his entire persona and almost take the Ali mantle in terms of a more gregarious, outwardly, the Rumble in the Jungle George was kind of a quiet, brooding guy with a bulldog and didn't really want to, let Ali have the media coverage. But when he came back in the 90s, he was a different guy too. He was like Uncle George. So like not only did he reinvent himself stylistically, he went to that cross guard but I just his story. I want to know what happened to George in the in between years because he
The
seemed like
innate
a changed person.
intelligence, the innate intelligence, the adaptability was off the board. I say this over and over to people, and for a long time they didn't get it. George Foreman's a genius. He is a rare genius. You just don't meet people with that large a mind and that logical a perception of what they need to do to become an audience attraction. And he totally transformed his personality for the purpose of making money, becoming a star, redeveloping his boxing career, ultimately getting himself back to the threshold where he could try to get vengeance for what had happened in Zaire. And the night that he knocked out Michael Moorer, he got that vengeance. You will recall, it's one of the greatest stories ever in boxing. He walked to the ring November 5, 1994, for the Moorer fight, reciting out loud the words to the impossible dream as he walked to the ring to dream the impossible dream, to bear with unbearable sorrow. All those amazing lyrics, and he was saying them to himself to psych himself up as he got ready to go into the ring. And ultimately, I think the single biggest step that George took in redeveloping and transforming his personality was to get over his resentment of the Rumble in the Jungle and choose to be Ali's friend. And they wound up as late night phone partners. And George took it upon himself to see to it that when people would bring together the 5 living heavyweight champions, Foreman, Norton, Ali, Frazier, Holmes, when people would put them together for corporate events, George, along with Larry, would stand in a position between Ali and Frazier so that Joe could never get angry and go after Muhammad the way that he wanted to. And when I was told that, I said, George, you protected Muhammad Ali, and he said it was the only right thing to do. It was the decent thing to do, and he was in every way a decent human being and a wonderful, loving man. I'm tearing up right now because I miss him really desperately, and I wish he had managed to stay around a little bit longer. The title of my autobiography comes from my call of his win over Michael Moorer. The prologue in the autobiography, the first thing you read is 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old George win his Olympic gold medal in Mexico City. There are various other ways in which he touches and informs the book, and he died 2 weeks to the day before the publication of the book. So his death accidentally became ancillary promotion for my autobiography because every radio interviewer, every podcast interviewer connected. George died. How do you feel about that? It was really hard to talk about, but it was also very fitting in a way. And of course, generationally, I felt so close to him. Over and over and over when we were working together, he would call me young man. Young man, you got to go do this. Young man, we're going to do this, da, 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 da. And I would say, George, you're born January 12, 1949. I'm born April 8, 1949. We are fewer than 3 months apart. Why do you constantly call me young man? And he said, well, because you're such a young man. And I could never dissuade him from that. So I loved him very deeply, and it tears me up to talk about him even now.
Well, that's all right. I cry like 5 times a week, Jim. I can name 12 songs that will immediately just make me, I'm a puddle every time I hear him. Don McLean's American Pie, which was my sister's favorite song before she died in a freak car accident, which we could never play in my household from that point on. But like every time I hear that song, I'm a puddle. I want to just I want to bring up a fighter. I'm going to just name fighters' names, and I want to get your impressions on each of these. These are 10 of my favorite fighters to watch. Now, I'm not saying they're the 10 greatest, but they're the 10 favorites because of their style, because I just found him the most entertaining. I'm going to start with Roberto Duran.
Fantastic fighter. Uh, Amazing human being in a lot of ways. There are things about Roberto that I should not be the person to reveal, which are so counterintuitive. You would think, no, that's not really possible. But he had quite a life. I used to very, very occasionally dine with him at Victor's Cuban Cafe, 70th Street and Columbus Avenue in New York. His wife was lovely. And, one of the greatest fighters of all time. You don't find many fighters who combine the skill and the power and speed and the savagery, the killer instinct of a Roberto Duran. And if you want to hear Ray Leonard tell great stories, ask him about fighting Roberto Duran.
Man, yeah, and Duran was just so great at making in the ring adjustments, though. I mean, he could win a fight so many different ways. He's got that reputation of winning fights on the inside with his hands, but we saw against Hagler, whom he gave a great fight. Hagler won on the inside, and Duran was able to work pretty effectively from the outside, which wasn't what we, generally associate with him. And he's a guy that went up like 6 weight classes over his career. Next guy, I've already mentioned him forever, but I just feel like he's, for many, many years, in Don Dunphy's era, he was generally considered the number 2 pound for pound fighter who ever lived. And that's Ezzard Charles, who I just thought was so slick. When I watched Ezzard Charles fighting that long ago, I watched the footwork. I watched the way he's slipping punches. He looks so slick for that era. I feel like the guy was in a time machine. What are your impressions of Ezzard Charles?
Well, partially because of Foreman and Frazier and Ali, all of whom had physical gifts that set them apart from the competition. Sometimes the great heavyweight craftsmen are overlooked. Ezzard Charles was the great heavyweight craftsman. And every one of those fighters that I just mentioned, Ali, Foreman, Frazier, Holmes, various others, they would all tell you that they learned lessons from Ezzard Charles that could not be learned anywhere else. Another River City American fighter, by the way, with a classic American background of upward mobility and skill, class, determination. Very hard to overrate somebody as great as Ezzard Charles.
Yeah. Now here's another guy I love. I love counter punchers. If I have to pick a favorite style, it's the counter puncher. Juan Manuel Marquez.
Juan Manuel Marquez, arguably the greatest counterpuncher of his generation. The night that he knocked out Pacquiao in Las Vegas, my wife, by that time a well-schooled veteran fight fan, was one of many people in the arena who initially thought, is Pacquiao dead? Did he actually kill him with that punch? Because it was such a perfectly thrown, solidly landed, devastating, you're not going to get up counterpunch. It was the perfect evocation of what a counterpunch is supposed to be. And that was Marquez's skill. He was never going to be beloved in Mexico the way fighters like Barrera and Morales were, because he was a counterpuncher and he was not an attacker. Mexicans prized the attacker. They wanted to see Salvador Sanchez. They wanted to see Julio Cesar Chavez. And those were full-scale, nonstop attackers. So the Marquez style was not beloved and prized in Mexico, but ultimately he made them appreciate it with his brilliant performances.
And now, since we're talking about relentless attackers, I'm going to skip on my list. I'm skipping around just according to the transitions here. But here's a buzzsaw for you. Aaron Pryor.
Relentless attacker. And, multiple punches from multiple angles. How can he do that? another River City fighter, Cincinnati, Ohio. Uh, and, that tradition runs so deep in American boxing. And yeah, he was phenomenally good. And at his peak, in his prime, you didn't want to get near him. I think he ultimately penalized himself outside the ring. That's not unusual in boxing. Many fighters do that. And Aaron ultimately faded from the scene.
Hypothetically, there's all the talk about how Aaron Pryor would have really give Leonard so much trouble just because of his, as Harold Letterman would say, his effective aggressiveness, Jim, is dictating the fight. I'll tell you, Jim, I got it 117, 114 Pryor. But what do you think would have happened if Leonard and Pryor had fought? I see Leonard handling him because I just don't think Pryor had much defense. I love watching him. I mean, he's so fun to watch because it's
I
like
think it would
walking
have been a
into a.
great fight. And I think at the end of the day, Leonard's youth, hand speed, combination punching, and the degree to which the judges favored Ray Leonard would have ultimately tilted the fight in his favor. And
Yeah,
the
well, we
number
saw
one
that several
all-time
times.
elevator fight, you know what the number one all-time elevator fight is. And an elevator fight is a fight where Jim Lampley gets on an elevator and somebody in the back of the elevator says, hey, who was the real winner of Hagler versus Leonard? It's the all-time number one elevator fight. And as soon as somebody asks you that question, you know that their answer is Hagler won the fight. But Larry used to say maybe Hagler won the fight, but Ray won the scorecards. Everybody judges differently and scores differently according to their own predilections. Ray got the win that night. Recently, I asked 94-year-old Larry Merchant to go
God
back to
love
the
him.
top of our conversation. I asked the great Larry Merchant, Larry, do you see any chance that Terrence Crawford can beat Canelo Alvarez? And Larry said, Jim, does our friend Ray Leonard have an official decision win over Marvin Hagler on his record? And I said, yes, he does. He said, well, if Ray Leonard could get an official decision win over marvelous Marvin Hagler, then certainly there's a way that Terrence Crawford could beat Canelo Alvarez. And probably it's the same thing that Ray did. Jump in, land a combination, jump out. Jump in, land another combination, jump out. Never expose yourself to risk from what is coming back against a bigger puncher, but manage to score enough and do it in an eye-catching style. And oh, by the way, it doesn't hurt if when the bell sounds at the end of the round, you throw both arms up in the air and parade
Oh,
back to your corner to
how
say
often
to
do we see
everyone
that from
around you,
both
I
fighters,
won
though?
that round.
Yeah. Often both fighters are doing it, though. That's the one problem with that. Like, especially at
Yeah,
after
well,
the.
only Ray did it that night because that would have been beneath Marvin to theatrically throw his arms in the air and try to say to the judges, Marvin was so sure he was winning, he didn't need that. It just looked like a joke to him. But Ray was a performer, and Ray was skilled, and he got over.
And you bring up an interesting point, and it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of a black mark on boxing, really, is it decisions. Some of the decisions, like, I mean, I've watched the first, or the second, is it the second Hearns Leonard, the draw with Hearns and Leonard, and every time I watch it, I still got Tommy winning that fight. But there are guys that are going to get those decisions, and I think it's safe to say that Canelo is kind of one of those guys. If a fight's close, kind of like Leonard did, I feel like, I mean, I feel like Bud will have to beat him somewhat convincingly.
Tommy knocked Ray down twice, and the judges gave him a draw. Tommy's brother had been shot in Detroit the day before. Um, it was impossibly unlucky to be Tommy Hearns at that particular moment in time. And by the way, Tommy could never find it in his heart or in his gut to hate Ray or resent Ray for the degree to which judges favored him. Tommy accepted the draw and was graceful at the post-fight news conference. Anyone else would have screamed bloody murder. But Tommy was who he was. He had other things on his mind. His brother had just been shot to death. And he also had a friendship with Ray, which was going to go on long past that moment. So I love Tommy Hearns. I've always loved him. He's one of the sweetest, gentlest, nicest human beings I've ever met. He was trained by my very best friend in life. I've never had a closer friend than Emmanuel Stewart.
Wow.
And so I had a natural rooting urge for Thomas because he was Emmanuel's fighter. But at the end of the day, Emmanuel was close to everybody. Emmanuel was close to Ray too. And he said to me after that fight, he said, there's something in Tommy that just blocks him from getting over against Ray. Yeah, he knocked him down twice, but I guess Ray won enough rounds for the judges to call it a draw.
So, I mean, it's just sometimes we've both seen decisions that are just, like, come on. I mean, let's go.
Yeah, Ukraine. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a part of the fabric of prize fighting. I mean, to win when the mob ran it, there was, I mean, a lot of fights were set up. You would hope that the sport evolved, we would see less of it, and maybe we are. But I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room for me. It's the one frustrating part of of boxing at the end of the day is when, like, the ultimate decision does not seem objectively true.
I remember calling the first fight between Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward at Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut. And breathtaking, unbelievable combat. Very difficult to fathom what you were watching. Emmanuel Stewart shouting, "Oh my God," over and over and over, as these two guys seemed dead set on trying to kill each other in the ring. And eventually, 1 or 2 point decision for Mickey Ward. And after the fight, I ran into Pat Lynch, Arturo Gatti's manager, in the hallway outside, and Pat was crying. And I said, "Pat, why are you weeping?" And he said, "I'm weeping because I can't believe the judges gave that fight to Mickey. I can't believe they found a way to score it for him. And Arturo's never been better than that. That was the best he can possibly fight. I just feel so hurt that Arturo didn't get the win." And I said, "Pat, if we brought back all 7,000 or 8,000 people who were in these seats tonight a year from now and polled them all and said, who got the official decision in the fight, how many of them do you think would get it right?" At the end of the day, people inculcate these things in their own way. And if you loved Mickey Ward, you walked away from that fight saying Mickey Ward won it. If you loved Arturo Gatti, as more people did, you walked away saying Arturo won it. And at the end of the day, they both won because they wound up deeply embedded in each other's souls and characters as friends, as blood brothers. The greatest scene in the whole Ward-Gatti trilogy is after the third fight in Atlantic City, when they insist on getting into the same med truck together to go for the post-fight examination at the hospital. And they have to be put into the same suite at the hospital because they don't want to be separated from each other. Arturo and Mickey fell in love, and that's what happens in those great trilogies.
So now I'm going to turn back the clock with my next fighter, who is another old school guy who is also very, I mean, to the youngsters, he's almost as well known for a certain referee job he did at a certain fight. You'll know who I'm talking about when I say the name Jersey Joe Walcott. What are your impressions of Joe as a fighter?
Technician. Jersey Joe Walcott was very similar to Ezra Charles in the sense that his edge came from boxing skill, boxing knowledge. He wasn't a particularly colorful personality, but he was a great, great fighter who was the antidote to Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano and various others in his generation.
Yeah, his footwork for a heavyweight always impressed me. And, he's one of the first guys you see drop his fist sometimes like that. But let's talk about the decision I alluded to when Jersey Joe Walcott refereed the second Ali Liston fight, the Phantom Punch. Okay, I mean, people have been going down this rabbit hole forever, the long count, everything else. Jersey Joe Walcott is sort of, his legacy has been sort of disrespected because, I mean, he made an honest mistake, but many would argue he didn't have the experience to be in the ring in that capacity in the first place. What is your thought on the Phantom Punch?
Well, I don't believe it was a phantom punch. I think that Ali had sensationally fast hands, and when you land a clean punch in close quarters, and you have a certain leverage on it, the angle of the glove is going down, uh, you're going to deliver some power. And of course, Liston had holes in his game. He was not a great citizen outside the ring, and there were all sorts of rumors about what Liston was doing in training, quote unquote, leading up to the second fight. And of course, we tend to forget fight was originally scheduled in Boston, ultimately moved to Lewiston, Maine. Why? Because of all the rumors that there would be an assassination attempt that night in a revenge plot related to the slaying of the Muslim leader, and there were a lot of people who thought, Ali among them, I don't want to be in that ring because bullets might be flying and a bullet could hit me. And that's how the fight wound up in the obscure Lewiston, Maine setting. And of course, Neil Leifert took the greatest still photograph in the history of boxing that night. The photograph of Ali with his
Get up! Nobody's going to believe this.
Elbow, et cetera, standing over Liston, prolonging the count, by the way, giving Liston more of a chance to get up because he didn't move away from where he was standing and stuff. And Neil is still shooting boxing photographs 60 years later, which is fairly unbelievable in and of itself. But I don't think it was a phantom punch. I think Ali landed a clean right hand, and I think a very diminished, no longer in great shape Sonny Liston went down.
And I think that for me, Liston, as you said, he was not popular. He didn't do himself outside. I mean, being a juice man for the mob isn't going to make you popular with the American public. But I do find him to be kind of a tragic story because, didn't he say that his dad basically came from like 14 kids or something, and his dad basically used him as a mule, and he ran away at an early age. I mean, the guy grew up with so many hard knocks, and and then, he finally gets to be the champ and nobody treats him with any respect really. And he felt like he seemed sad about it though. Like he didn't seem angry that like he just was there and he's like, I mean, he's supposed to be the belle of the ball. And he just seemed like a broken dude who had a long broken life. And he just seemed tragic.
There used to be a popular tattoo, Born to Lose. Sonny Liston had a born to lose personality. He never celebrated his tenure as the heavyweight champion. He knocked Patterson out so easily that he was penalized for how easy it looked, 2 first-round knockouts in a row, and therefore didn't get the kind of fan adulation that you might have expected for somebody who was such a dominant heavyweight champion. And then, of course, he goes from the 2 first-round knockouts over Patterson to being upset by Cassius Clay in what was a very legitimate Clay win, regardless of what other people might have thought. And then the rematch in Lewiston, Maine, and Sonny's down within the first 90 seconds of the fight, and that's the end of that. I have friends who are boxing writers who have said to me openly and factually, Sonny was a heroin addict at that point in his life. I have no evidence. I don't know if he was a heroin addict. I won't quote those people because I don't know if they really know, but that's something that I have heard passed around among qualified boxing writers.
And the next guy on my list is somebody who sort of, to me, conjured the Cassius Clay version of Ali, pre-66. I mean, I think with the Cleveland Williams fight being the apex. And this is somebody you've worked with, but his athleticism, the hand speed, his ability to get in and out like a blur reminded me of young Clay. And I know this is a guy you got to be close with, who was broadcast partner and friend, Roy Jones Jr.
Roy Jones Jr. is a great fighter, unbelievable physical specimen who could have succeeded in any sport. Didn't matter which sport he chose, he was going to be great. The most gifted boxer of his generation. Wound up with what is a kind of odd penalty in boxing, and that is the light heavyweight division. If you want to be ignored for your great talent in boxing, fight in the light heavyweight division because you're overshadowed by heavyweights and you're overshadowed by middleweights and welterweights, all of whom have more natural cachet than what is a light heavyweight. It sounds like an oxymoron. So Roy happened to get himself physically slotted into an area where he was never going to get as much credit as he deserved. And I think that was basically okay with him. Roy's a secure personality and a great human being, one of my dearest friends forever, and it was a tremendous privilege to work with him.
Okay, here's one for you, and this is not a household name, but of course you'll know him, and boxing insiders remember him as a great fighter, but Buddy McGirt. I always like to watch Buddy McGirt fight.
Another smart guy, another guy who, knew the craft, knew a lot about boxing. There was a little bit of the Bernard Hopkins in Buddy McGirt, and both of them were stylists who understood how to win fights with craft, and Buddy became an outstanding trainer as the result of that.
Next on the list is a guy who I just find a lot of people, even though, he retired with that zero, he beat even Bernard Hopkins. Many would argue way past his prime. Bernard Hopkins didn't have a lot of power, but doesn't really get very much credit in a certain way. Because of that is Joe Calzaghe. That guy the hand speed I just find him fun to watch because the hand speed is just like what just happened. It's like a Warner Brothers cartoon. They're moving so fast. I don't know how much power behind those punches, and I think that he's sort of underrated because that reason. How do you kind of rank Joe Calzaghe?
Well, Joe Calzaghe retired unbeaten. Now, how many fighters do that? It takes winning a lot of fights. It takes a level of self-possession that says, okay, I'm ready to walk away. I've got enough money. I've got enough acclaim, et cetera, et cetera. It takes getting a decision over Bernard Hopkins in a fight that Adelaide Byrd scores the opposite way. And Joe was a tremendously talented fighter. He was a southpaw, which helped him. He had blinding speed for a light heavyweight. And, of course, he fought a lot of the fights in the United Kingdom where he had a kind of home court advantage. I liked him a lot as a person. I'm not sure that my buddy Bernard did, but at the end of the day, Joe accomplished a lot, and I put him high on the list.
So the last guy on my list, and we're winding down here, Jim. It's been such a pleasure. I had to take somebody to task on a boxing forum. This is how much I love the sport. I screw around on these boxing forums, and somebody said that this guy had a weak chin, and I had to take him to task for that because here's a guy that Chavez did put him down twice, and he had a little trouble with Terry Norris, but weak chin, I don't think so. Maybe my favorite Olympiad from that '86 team, Meldrick Taylor.
Meldrick Taylor had unbelievable hand speed. Meldrick Taylor had foot speed. Meldrick Taylor had skill. Meldrick Taylor was clearly the winner over Julio Cesar Chavez with seconds to go when two bizarre things happened. Number one, out of the blue, Chavez scored a knockdown. And number two, in a fit of misjudgment, Lou Duva in Meldrick's corner jumped up onto the ring apron to yell into the adjoining corner to his fighter. And when he did that, he distracted Richard Steele. And Steele turned away from issuing a count to Meldrick Taylor and looked at Duva, which interrupted his rhythm, interrupted his focus on the situation, and wound up stopping the fight with 2 seconds left, which I thought was a rank injustice. You have an unbeaten American Olympian headed toward the biggest win of his career against the biggest name Mexican fighter who exists. That Mexican fighter manages to produce a late round comeback and scores a knockdown, but Meldrick got up. He wasn't knocked out. So for Richard to stop the fight with, I believe, 2 or 3 seconds remaining on the clock was, in my view, an injustice.
And just underlines what I said at the head in my monologue, which is there's just so much drama and so many great stories in boxing. And it's just been such a pleasure to talk to you because you got a million of them. I could do this for 10 hours. I just want to close in saying, Jim, that mad respect for your idol, Don Dunphy, for Howard Cosell, for Max Kellerman and the rest of them. But for my money, you're the best. Always will be the best, and I really wish you were calling Crawford Canelo.
Well, I'm not, and I would like to call that fight because of my connections to both fighters, but I will look forward to sitting at home and watching Netflix and seeing if all the many things I've said about the fight were in some way, shape, or form on target. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, most likely. And whoever wins is still my friend, and whoever loses is still my friend, and maybe my neighbor, if that happens to be Canelo. But I think it's a fascinating piece of matchmaking. I'm really happy that the fight is taking place. I wish them both the best of luck.
I'm going Terrence Crawford, TKO late rounds, 10th or 11th. I think he's going to turn it on because he knows he may not be able to win a decision. And by that time, I think Canelo's going to be a little beat up in the up here. So anyway, he is Jim Lampley. He is the voice of boxing as far as I'm concerned. It was such a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for being our fresh face in hell, Jim.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, bud.